Subscribe my channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
I have not been any more happier introducing somebody on this stage as much as I have been today. With me today on Daydreamers with Himika is a lady who leads the artisan movement in this country. She is about enablement, empowerment, financial inclusion, so many things. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to just give the stage to her. Please welcome me. Please welcome with me Miss Anita Reddy, founder of Dwarka and a Padma Shri awardee. Ma'am, welcome to Daydreamers with Himika.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Himika. This is really lovely to be here with you.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Very inspiring.
It's my honor to have you here. So, ma'am, my
Great.
first question is going to be exactly what it is every time. The name, because I know the name represents the soul of the person who creates it. Why is the name of this movement Dwarka?
Okay, that has an interesting beginning too. I was, by the time the name came into the head, I was already in touch with a man who needed support from the artisan community. And then I was thinking, what can we do? How do we do it? And so on. When it was like, hey presto, the name Dwarka came to my head because my father, Dwaraknath Reddy, was always called Dwarak in his younger days. And he was the founder of all the trusts that I'm running in the more recent years, called the Ramanarpanam and the Dwarka movement itself. He's been my inspiration and guide. So it just turned out that I was not thinking about him or me at that point of time. I was thinking about the development of weavers and rural artisans came into my head because I was thinking about development. I was thinking about the weavers and the village women and the rural artisans and the art itself, which was the very basis of my having gone there to meet the gentleman who needed support. So immediately it came to mind and I said, hey, Dwaraka comes together. Apart from which, of course, Dwaraka is symbolic in our Hindu stories and mythology and has Lord Krishna attached to it. But in this case, I mean, I would say that the Lord Krishnas or the people with Lord Krishna in essence of the feeling are the people themselves. So though the two are not interrelated, the reason it came up as a platform of the Dwaraknath Reddy Ramanathanam Trust. And when it came up as a platform, after 10 years of working with people, it metamorphosized into Dwarka Plus, the People's Livelihoods Upliftment Society. So by that time, we were ready for women to kind of take charge of the process and the movement themselves. And soon after, when I began to feel that was going well, and that was the marketing business wing with all the women in our society, then came alive the Dwarka Foundation, and it changed to development of weavers and rural artisans, development of women and rural artisans for knowledge and action. So I brought in the focus in the foundation towards women empowerment, women development. So in a sense, Dwarka related to art, related to women, related to weavers, rural artisans and communities. That's how the name came about. And we continue to make it into a name that should belong to the people in the essence of anybody thinks of Dwarka, they should think of the Kalamkari art and the artisans. That's how we work to, around the name itself. So that's the beginning of Dwarka. And the journey was a long one. And we kept moving forward. So would you like me to share some parts of that journey, that story?
In fact, this was my next question, that when I was researching about you, I in fact read that a knock at the door set a lot of actions, intent into action. A lot of things started from there. So I want to know right from that story as to how the journey progressed further from the beginning.
Okay, I may need to go a few years before that, because why would I relate with a knock on the door or the gate? It's because I had worked for 20 years in communities, mostly urban poor communities that we call slums, where the poorest of people from the year 1978, when I walked into a community all by myself with no ism or any other thing behind me, there wasn't a set pattern of an activity through any organization or any such formation of an organization also. Me and my willingness to want to be able to go there, and my own desire, my dream, if I must say, to be able to say that I can give something of myself. So what am I doing sitting at home? And I went into a community called Lakshmipuram in Bangalore, and therein started this journey of working with people in slums, which taught me the huge number of challenges that one has to face. And it's not easy when you work in the urban situation, because you're really dealing with very challenging situations of land, shelter rights, women's involvement, decision making, local governance, community mobilization, motivation. So all these were not words anymore. 20 years later when I heard the knock on the. So by this time, we had already faced bulldozers, the mafia, the landlords who attacked us, and all of this, which formed the background. And therefore, a knock on the door meant that, and it wasn't a common knock on a door, it was like a hassled knock on the gate, actually. And when I went out and I heard the dogs barking, I saw this gentleman there, and he was rather hungry. One knew that there was poverty behind the story there already. He was carrying, in those days, people would take bundles of cloth and try to sell in the city. And I remember buying shawls from people, or they would come from as far as West Bengal to sell saris. Or so that kind of a knock. It was somebody who was trying to sell. I don't call them salesmen whatsoever. I call them people looking for an opportunity. And here was when I went to him and talked to him, I found that he had a bundle of cloth. And when I asked him where he was from and all that, he told me his story. He looked, really hungry to begin with. So that was the first aspect one had to deal with, and make sure that, he calms down and he's more feeling secure about himself. So we took him in home. My father was there that day. And since I had this whole background of working with people, I knew that I could sense and make him feel at ease about himself. And he had this cloth of Kalamkari he was trying region. And he had come from Andhra looking with hope that he'd find a market, and if he was going gate to gate. But what normally happens when people like that go gate to gate, the dogs are barking. If there is a watchman, the watchman is saying, go away, go away. So this is the kind of scene that I was faced with. But it didn't take me very long to say that another story will unfold, because I knew that me into a potentially a potential space where there's a need, and I could respond to that need to the best of my ability. So that's the story about the knock on the gate. I didn't leave it as a knock on the gate. We take it steps forward. I went to Srikalahasti the next day. He came home. He talked to us about the Kalamkari artists who are living in lot of debt and lot of penury in the Srikalahasti region. Money lenders harassing women, not forming in the slums. And I said, all you need to do is collectivize them to make them all come together. And then knew that there was a skill set also available there. He shared his cloth. We, of course, bought for one day, but then that you buy for one day, then what do you do after that? So that led me to believe I could go there. And my father came with me. He's all of 96 today. But even at that time, he took the choice to come with me. And I was very, very grateful for that first source of inspiration I got from him being there. And we were in Srikalahasti, and the story begins there under the trees, how we met with the women there and how we began to get them together. That's the rest of the story. Yes.
Interesting. What I also want to know is, has there, since you have been a part of this movement from the very beginning, has there been an evolution of sorts in the art itself, in Kalamkari itself? And why Kalamkari? Why so much importance to this art? Why did it, apart from the fact that the artisan was doing this kind of art, but still, why kalamkari? And is there an evolution in it?
I wouldn't answer the first part of the question with too much expertise on this, but I would answer it with a grassroots reality and understanding. Because what took me there was a person who was in poverty and needed help. And I knew there was a skill set because I had seen his cloth. And that was hand painted kalamkari. That's what I first learned. But when I go there and I go visit the temple with them and being there, I know that it is an art form that has been patronized 500 years ago historically. Krishnadevaraya kingdom and the Maharaja himself, Krishnadevaraya, is said to have patronized this art form. And history goes back. Even recently, Chittor district celebrated 500 plus years today of Krishnadevaraya's reign in that area. So the temple walls were adorned with this art, very beautiful art, and that's perhaps the beginning of the story of hand-painted kalamkari in a kingdom where the artists were given the scope and hope and patronized by a king to do it. It flourished. It also flourished because it was in the banks of the Swarnamukhi River, the river that was those days flowing, not dammed, not urbanized, not developed in what we call today a development paradigm, which really takes away from the sense of such growth, artisan communities and so on. It was flourishing in a certain pattern. Then history reels forward to the year 1964, when Srimati Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay, who the whole culture and art in this country at that time, under the crafts councils that she developed and so on, she had been to Srikalahasti and set up the first small training unit. And there are still artists who came out of that by saying I saw a lot of penury, poverty, and issues of debt and suffering. Even suicides were the norm of the day there in those areas. So it was a very painful situation. So I did not really see the thriving Kalamkari artisan community that might have become rejuvenated in years past. But I stepped in 1998, at the very end of 1998. So by the turn of the millennium, I had walked around all the villages, and I knew that I needed to organize people, mobilize them, motivate them for collective action. And if we did that, perhaps we would regain the lost glory of whether it was a Krishnadevaraya kingdom or the fabulous cultural revival that Srimati Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay had inspired in that region. So when I went around, I found a handful of artists. There may have been about maximum 30 who we could call artists. Then there were about another 250 artisans. And these artisans are the ones who would do like a process in the artwork of a sari would be sketched on by the artist, and then somebody would color it and wash it, dye it, so on and so forth. So that way, at the most, there were about 300 people there practicing the original hand-painted kalamkari art form. Now, it's beautiful by itself. It could be diversified to make it a economic rejuvenation skill program. To me, there was a dichotomy about accepting whether are you going to remove the flavor of the original art? Are you going to do just about anything? And I'm basically a community activist. I'm a social activist on the field. So to me, the community struggling to survive economically was the first priority. And there were a lot of other social issues continued to be there, very, very strong. There were people who were ostracized. There were Dalit communities that were not part of the flow of this kind of development we saw. Women were not necessarily in the forefront, maybe one or two, if at all. So there was a male domination around this whole environment. So there were other skills. This itself took its time to organize, but there were the sculptors and woodcarvers of the area over there. And of course, the dyeing that was needed as part of this process. So, and the people, the weavers, I mean, most famous in that region were the Venkatgiri weavers. Though Venkatgiri is a town little away from Srikalahasti, all the weaving community was here. But handloom was going, mechanized weaving was coming into place. People were just losing their will to be able to survive. There was a lot of economic deprivation there. So what really led me into the whole process with such strength and courage and belief was to rejuvenate what is existing there, what is really time from Bangalore to Srikalahasti, never uprooted anyone, never sorted out one against the other. Everybody, it was an open door. Dwarka opened its doors, and all the artists, even the senior most artists of that area, had come to us saying, would you take this? And then we did take it at that time through the trust platform. And then that meant that we have to sell it. So after we had seen the process in the villages, we would have continuous meetings. I would go there against the biggest odds. The roads were no good. And every time I went there, I had to go early enough to be able to get people together. So walk around everywhere, collectivize people and learn about them. Because as I said, I was not I didn't set in this journey as a designer, or I didn't walk into it as with any expertise or even a historian or none of those backgrounds. I just went there saying, I'm me and I can do something. I mean, I have had a very comfortable life. There's no reason to ask for anything more than what one has. Therefore, whatever I have, let me offer. And then what happens in a process like this, you learn from the people. You never go there saying, I know it all. So I went there saying that you are my gurus, whoever you are. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are. I learn from you. Maybe we recapsule it together in a way that it empowers us and we take it back into the communities. So it meant working with the men in the area, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of women beating, a lot of other kinds of harassment, violence against, gender violence. So we had to deal with all of this simultaneously. So it wasn't just the art form that we're talking about. The essence and the core of Dwarka is that woman who we call a woman artist that multiplied into so many, so many. That was the beginnings of the journey, and we've never looked back. It's the same thing. We keep motivating people. COVID is another kind of another dimension of poverty in a sense. We had seen already so many challenges. So COVID days come with its own challenges now. So last few days, every day it's been one call after another, not in Zoom calls, WhatsApp calls at this stage, but gathering artists in their villages, into them, motivating them, taking the whole process into the village itself so that they can work from home. They used to love to be sent because they got a break from their daily routine sometimes. They loved that. But got necessitated that they needed to work from home. We encouraged that. And the results have been fairly good. So that we stand today as we talk about that particular journey. Yeah. So, and
should I ask? Yeah. So
yeah.
tell me something. One part of the journey would be enabling them, creating a model that helps bringing their work into the market. And then there is a second, more difficult part, which is about selling the art, selling the craft. Now, while we talk a lot about artists, I think the consumer or the country or the globe hasn't been very kind to artists or artisans. It can be kinder. So, how did you meet those challenges? How did you actually take the art to the market in India and globally?
I believe the first thing that we really want to pump our people with, be they artists or anyone else, is that sense of self-worth and belonging and ownership. It's a sense of self-identity to begin with. So whatever they begin to see themselves as, not just a poor, beaten, battered, no, that you are the wealth of this region. In fact, I tell them, how do you know historically you're not part of that court, the court, the king's court and the people that ruled it? You are part of that. You lived here, after all, it's only 500 years history. So your roots go back to the wealth of that kingdom. So you are the kings, you are the princes and the queens of this area. So begin to feel that you are somebody with your artistic skills, and not all of them came with the skill. They took it on. In fact, to beat poverty, to defeat poverty, they learned. It's not, we call the art form a heritage art form, but it's not necessarily that every artist today is an heritage artist over there or from that family. Maybe there are a few of them there still, but most of them are women who have learned by doing it with other senior people or senior artists. So first thing is to feel their own self-worth, then begin to feel about themselves as artists, and then therefore the quality of the work that they produce or they're guided into looking at in a myriad ways is also taking on the quality, and that was very important. Then of course we would relate with them. Those were very interesting, challenging days, because we started converting. If you got a small piece of cloth from them with the Kalamkari art on it, I was spending 90% of my time in slums, even at that point of time. It's just that part of me that kept going back and doing this with the power. So I would come here and we would create small purses. Say they cost 200, not 200 rupees those days. They cost 20 rupees and we sold 10 purses. We would earn 200 rupees. It was so exciting. I've stood in front of Nilgiris with purses in a tray to try and see how the customer relates. The only Nilgiris allowed us in those days to stand on Brigade Road. So we would stand with a tray and ask people, would you pick this up for 20 rupees? What do you feel about this purse? And that is how we did our market survey. Literally, I did this myself. And then we went to apartment complexes and we started asking people, would you take something? But there was a great dignity in this whole process. It didn't matter who was doing what end of which work. The whole thing, I would always have artists with me, so they learned on the process. But there was never a feeling of we were begging anybody for anything. We had something worth its while, and we were telling the people there that, look, this is a fabulous product. You won't get this kind of a product at this price. And there's a double-edged sword that you're helping communities with it, end of the day. But buy it for what you see as a product. So nobody could look at this as a dole or a charity. It was always treated as a right of the people, and the right goes coupled with responsibility. So we behaved with, doing our right and responsibility correctly. We expected the same from society because we were not asking anyone to give a free dole over here. And that worked. That kind of psychological acceptance of the whole process worked. Now we began, and I had a friend, Raji, who came along at that time and said, can I join you? She was a good friend from old days. So I said, certainly. And then she got very excited and she started designing other products, small products. So together we would go and come back and we would do things like that. And then we decided that we will have exhibitions. We went into exhibition, then we opened up a showroom. Showroom was an exclusive hand-painted kalamkari with vegetable dyes. I mean, that whole line goes together, because today kalamkari has taken on different forms, and it's very, very sad sometimes to see the circle where it is, but then that's the new challenge. And I'll come to that from market reference. But we opened up a showroom and it began to work well. People started trickling in, coming. Then there was more excitement about design. And as one of the artists told me, senior master artist, he said, Amma, from now onwards, Kalamkari will only look forward. We will never look backward again from Srikalahasti. And I said, how are you saying it with so much of confidence and verve and joy in your heart? You say this. After all, we opened one small showroom. He says, this is the only place in the country which has nothing else except hand-painted Kalamkari in a myriad forms. There is so much diversification, and we treated this as the space for the artists to come, feel, belong, and own, literally. So that made them relate in the market. They started relating in the exhibitions. I've sent the girls out everywhere handling 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs worth of material. So they go, they talk about themselves. It doesn't matter that English was not there, but they would go and express themselves, and they would come back and feel more pumped up because they knew whether they sold by that time not 200 rupees but 1 lakh, 2 lakhs worth of goods that they were able to sell. And they came back and they were pumped up, and that's how we started building up. The global market took its time, but people started seeing. Many people loved buying this as a give back gift to their weddings, to their parties. In fact, my own 3 children, the entire theme was related to hand painted kalamkari and something or the other that worked with it. So what normally people would spend on marriages, I spent in the community over there. So that was the joy of the weddings, because it was a two-way process. Whatever came out of there was given out to everybody. So the market increased for us, so on and so forth. So regardless, it is the give backs, and then conferences, the conference orders, we started netting that in. And then we had a good production center set up in Bangalore, still led by this wonderful person named Kannan, who's still with us. And then lots of people under him. Then we trained 20 women in Chittoor itself, in Chittoor district. They're making fabulous products up to now, today, even through the difficult times. So be it even in Madanapalli, in another village area, and in Pulchela. So we started having groups of women who could do this. I even started it in Chikbalapur and want to revive it here in Karnataka also. But the art form never lost its roots. The art and the artist belong to that region, and that was them. We went there, we allowed them to come here and see the whole process, own the process of going to the top showrooms in the country. They've been to Mumbai, Calcutta, Ahmedabad, Delhi. They've been into showrooms like Sundari Silks or Saloni here, or and Fab India has taken their panels. So, and a lot of restaurants, Ebony's, Fati. So people started doing interiors with the work, and the artists knew how to collaborate, come together. 6 of them will sit, create huge panels. So the interiors became another marketing area. And we haven't, iceberg as yet. I know there's a whole lot of things that can happen, and it can open up much more. And the global market slowly started picking up. It could first be the NRIs who would buy things to return it, and then it became more and more people, until we were able to make it to IFAM, the International Folk Art Market, which is considered one of the biggest in the world, if not the biggest of that type in the world. It was very, very prestigious for us to break in, for Dwarka to break into IFAM. And in the second year, we also walked off with the Global Challenge Award, the World One Global Community Improvement Award from IFAM. And that belonged to the people. Obviously, if they could prove to the world who they are, that was a fabulous moment of taking this to the artists also. So in the global market, we have made a mark. That's because quality has to be maintained, understanding market and its colors and its hues. Somebody wants a bright red and yellow, another person wants very muted colors. I have a wonderful big designer telling me, don't you understand? I do. I can never get it out sometimes from them. But that doesn't matter to me, because anyone would say it's not my business. Leave it to the artist, and that's what we do often. But our artists are growing, they're learning, they're understanding. So we took them into the forest to look at leaves. We took them to understand flowers. We tried to teach them everything. They mix their own dyes now. So we have many miles to go, but they've come this far. And the market has recognized this huge improvement in the quality of the products that we're putting out. And we're innovating all the time. We're taking new initiatives. So I think the market is responding very warmly to this. We have done over 2 crores, 2.4 crores turnover last year. COVID has hit us bad before the GST hit us. Despite that, we have not lost hope, and we are moving forward. And I'm sure that more and more people are going to love the products that Dwarka has to share. So that's how we got the market. And market has a long way to go. The fashion market, the apparel market, just about anything has a very long way to go. So we need to tinker away. We need to keep going at it. I would, and I would call to all the young people, or even the older people, but all the young people who must remain the inspiration for our artists, and equally gain inspiration from the artists. It's a very, very two-way process. I mean, it's like a sponge that absorbs both ways. And that's the greatest joy and thrill of this. So open book, Dwaraka, for anybody. And that's how we have grown. Yeah.
Wow. Uh, when I
Okay.
was again researching about you, I read about the community
So
development. Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
Should I ask you the next question? Yeah. So I was reading about the. You want to say?
You're,
Yeah, sorry.
I'm losing your audibility a little bit.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Let me,
Sorry, I miss.
let me
Now
check.
it's better. Now it's better. Yeah.
Now better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I happened to read about the community
You're
development.
broken again.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
It's better. I can hear you saying, can you hear me? But
Okay. Now?
you're breaking a little otherwise.
Okay. The Community Development Fund.
Can't hear you now.
Turn off
S-
sound.
What should I do? I can't hear you.
Hear me
Oh,
now? Now? No? All right. I'm just trying to. Can you hear me now? Now?
better now. Yes.
Thank God. So I wanted to ask you about the Community Development Fund. I read about it, but it would be great if you could, enlighten us more about the Community Development Fund that you started for artisans.
With the breaks in the question, I'm understanding you're asking about the Community Development Fund.
Yes.
If that's it, shall I go ahead answering that question?
Yes. 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 I'm asking you about the Community Development Fund. Yes. I'll message you.
You there?
Yes, I'm there. Yes, it is the Community Development Fund. I'm asking for the Community Development Fund.
Okay. Community Development Funds. Okay, let me start answering that question. That's something that I was kind of familiar about, this process of setting up savings groups. We have done a lot of housing in the slums, so I was kind of familiar with how to get women together into smaller groups and learn to manage their own money, save so that their creditworthiness is proven to the banks when they give the money and so on. And also there are the programs called the Stree Shakti or the Dokra in Andhra Pradesh, and these are the groups that are formed by the government subsequently. So that's one model. And I knew the savings group model. But what was needed for the artists is they had no access whatsoever apart from their own earnings or whatever they did through their artwork. And they all worked at the pace they wanted to. There were no compulsions on anything for them. If somebody had a problem with a sick child at home, the artist never came to work even for a week. Or if they chose not to come and just relax, that was their choice too. So we had made it very flexible as a self-employment generating program. So then when we started bringing them into more formed groups or committees, so that in the collectivization process they get strength from each other and they're able to relate even on the social equations and financial equations, the Community Development Fund was established primarily because a lot of people would turn to me, especially in the early days, come to the trust either on health reasons or for education or sometimes even for the marriage of their children or just to gift something to another housewarming ceremony. Whatever it is, people never had that flexible money in their hands and they could not go to a bank and get it. and they could not pay exorbitant interest rates. They were spending all what they earned otherwise. I mean, not after Dwarka started, but otherwise to lenders. So if you can pay a money lender so much, you can very well give back to your own system and your own society within yourselves. So like the other models, we created women into smaller groups, and every group in a way was balanced with the amount of time they spent, the work they did, but amounts were given to them. It could be anywhere from 30,000 to 50,000 to even more than that. And this group was taught to use the money in a manner in which they don't just, if it's 50,000, everybody doesn't take 5,000 and go away and then lose it all. Instead, somebody may want 12,000 one day, another person may want 1,000 rupees. They had to be able to repay within a 10-month capacity, whatever they borrowed from that fund. And they would have to pay back 11th month, but it was managed by the people themselves. Every group had a bank account opened. So 10, 12, 15, 20 people would open a bank account, and they would handle this fund entirely by themselves. And as it kept growing, we also kept putting a little aside for the people. And there are about 20 lakhs now in that fund. And recently during COVID time, we were able to give them some relief from that fund also, apart from everything else that we put in and pulled in for the relief work. Through that fund also, they were able to rotate, revolve, and manage the tough days a little bit. So that fund belongs to the people, managed by themselves. And it's really the buffer zone for them, never get into debt again, never to feel that. Right now we are dealing with a girl who had to go in for a cesarean operation very suddenly. And because of the COVID times, there have been a lot of problems. And right now, today, actually, the girl needed 15,000 and we worked on that. So there are situations like this where they don't feel a sense of pinch and they need the money, and they're able to rotate this. So that's the community development fund we had put for the women, but ultimately the backlash is felt in the community. The backlash is felt in the sense of the backlash, negative, the positive backlash, as part of the the strengthening of the processes that we started about the children of the whole community, not only the artisan children. There is another program called the Jeevanotsava. So that's about art, performing arts. And in fact, community rights and arts is what I'm really working on now, called ARC, actually, Dwarka ARC, Arts, Rights and Communities. So children's rights through government schools, through their communities, have been established through other forms of art, and so that they recognize their parents. And women who are not able to really fall back on their spouse's earnings are finding this a very independent, economically liberating kind of support system that they have. So that's how the fund has formed. It's not been easy to sustain every aspect of everything that we're doing, especially now, but there's no looking back for sure, because a very strong movement now that's moving forward. We were hoping to build up some amount of, I bought some acres of land through the trust and dedicated it to this whole movement itself, not too far, 5 kilometers from Srikalahasti, some very valuable property. So wherever I've been working, I've been buying land and dedicating it to those communities over there. So even here, we are hoping that we can build up enough infrastructure to be able to really give them the power of a certain place where the global, the global eyes open up to a space like that, where the artists are there, they showcase what they want to do, they sell what they want to do, and people come there. It becomes an attraction to themselves. So this whole thing is towards that longer goal also. But it starts with the single woman who needs support to a larger context of community development itself. That's the Community Development Fund. Yeah. Not very unique in itself, but thinking it through as part of an artisanal movement and get it to be part of a rights-based thinking. And that I feel I have not seen in too many movements as such, because people don't identify their work with artisans really as a movement. They look at it as, and rightly so, I mean, each one does their own way of development. But there's a lot for me to learn from other people too. There's a lot that I can learn and take back to the communities. And I'm on that curve now during COVID. So,
Ma'am, in fact, you said not very,
yeah.
but at the end of the day, if with your work, with whatever, with all the work that you are doing, and also with the community enablement fund that we spoke of, if the lives of somebody, anybody can change towards better even a little, I think that's the center of it all, isn't it? I mean, it's so beautiful that you're changing lives in such a beautiful manner.
Yes, I feel so privileged to have been in this journey for 40 years. And regardless of where I've been or what I've done, it's an absolutely amazingly fulfilling journey in that sense. 9 times out of 10 times, you're only given a brickbat. 9 times out of 10 times, you're challenged to the core. It's not like everybody is praising what you're doing. You're not working for that anyway. There's no time for that. But what I'm saying is, even work turning action into something very fruitful is after 9 brickbats, you get the bouquet. And but the brickbats are thrown by a system and a society. The final bouquet is with the system of the society. But who are the flower garlands in between all this? Which is the flower garden itself, not the garlands, but the garden. Those are the people. They are the ones who create these garlands for this world or the bouquets for this world. They are the ones, and they are the richest award or reward that one can really get into in this process. And so it's, you don't even sit down to say that you have, oh, what a lovely moment, you have touched someone's life. You don't set out with that intent of getting something back. There's no expectation back. You just set out because you believe there is an action cut out. And if you do that, making someone's life a little better. So if I feel that, what I do now is going to be this or that and all that, the flavor or the essence of it is gone. But if I say that, look at this beautiful woman, she has no right to have tears coming down her cheeks unless they're tears of joy. It's a completely different ballgame that works, because you have to plunge yourself into that person's entirety of understanding. You don't replace them, of course, but you're very much a part of the whole flow of that person. And when you are as fulfilled with that person's journey itself, you're not two journeys separate. You're walking that mile with them, totally within them. And if you do this with thousands of children, women, people, and you get all kinds of people. You get people who criticize you. You get people who are drunk. In my early years, I had people tell me all the time, you come from a class background. What do you understand? You come from a community. What do you understand? And finally you realize none of these matter. None of the tags matter. None of the isms matter. What really matters is that you believe in faith and trust that the person you're doing whatever you're trying to do for is much more of the giver than the receiver. That person is the one who's really giving you an opportunity to reach out to them. And in that kind of a thinking, I believe, is the kind of fulfillment that just comes. You don't seek it or search it. It comes to you. It comes to you till you even think about it, and you kind of, melt into tears. It's that kind of a feeling. That's the truth and essence of this journey. And that's why I want more and more people to join me, because I feel, so many lives can change for everybody who walks this mile, not me alone, but with anybody. So I think it's, touching a life can mean so many things in so many ways. But more than we touching, your own life gets touched the most. That's what it is. Yes. And that's truly how it's happened so far. Yeah.
Ma'am,
And for that reason, you don't see an end to this journey. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. You make it.
Ma'am, I really want to ask about the Padma Shri moment in your life also. What changed to that? Also, did the stage for Dwarka get bigger after the Padma Shri happened? Or how was the...
Well, let me first say something that, you know, I understand people normally apply for these awards. Now, I just want to share here while I talk to you, since you've asked about this, that it was just a random phone call that I got one evening. It was January 25th, 2011. And January 26th is the Republic Day. 25th evening, I'm working with a girl named Bhagya, and I get this phone call where someone says in Hindi something, the word Padma Shri comes up. I don't understand a word of what he said. And so I say some call, some wrong number, put it down. Then someone else calls up and says that we are calling from the Rashtrapati Bhavan and would you accept the Padma Shri? So I said, Bhagya, there's a prank call, and I put it down. And somebody persisted on the other side and called me a third time. And that's when I asked, am I hearing right? That because there was no lead up to that phone call. There was nothing made me believe that I would ever get a phone call saying that, the Rashtrapati would be of giving this Padma Shri. So anyway, when it came, the very first thought that came to me is that, number one, they recognized the work in the slums and in the villages. It belonged to Dwarka, it belonged to the slums that I worked in, which were no longer slums, and it belonged to the people, therefore. So that was the first very humbling feeling that overwhelmed me. And then I said that if I were to accept something as big as this offer, I could only do it by bowing down to this country, because the country felt it needed to recognize, the people of the country felt that it needed to recognize whoever it was, and recognize whom? Recognize the people themselves, recognize a story of struggle, recognize their victory. So the Padma Shri to me has only remained in that form, always. So the moment came, when we received it in all humility, and it's nowhere up in the walls and all as many people would put out. It's tucked away in a small shelf in a cupboard. I have to tell my family that's what it is, don't lose in case. But that's not, reason being is not disrespect for anything, but complete respect and belief that the work itself had won somewhere. And therefore, there are miles to go. All that you can say is if somebody recognizes a step you have taken, that's not when you stop. That's when you decide to really run the marathon, because you're on the right track, you're running the right race. So let's keep going and let's start working to help thousands more. That's the only thing you can think of when you're doing this. And also, it gave a lot of power to the people, because I allowed the people to use it, not me, in a way in which they could tell others, look, our work has done this, and therefore we are sharing our work, and therefore let's multiply it. So people could use that award as their victory. And apart from that, it really carries nothing. People wonder sometimes if your name is Padma Shri or Anita. That's the only confusion it causes. But otherwise, does it change anything dramatically? And yet, in all humility, you belong to a very humbling world. It's not, it's nothing that you have done. So ultimately, my faith and belief is that we do, but the real doership rests somewhere else. Give it any name you want to, any faith, any superpower, or just power, whatever you call it. But for me, the doership as such rests completely somewhere else. The doing is important and not expecting. So somebody opens a tap somewhere, you're the conduit in a sense. You collect it, the whole thing, the buckets, the pails or whatever are full of it, and those are the people themselves. So you're just in between some system, trying to do what you're doing. And word could be catalyze, word could be empower, word could be do and fade away, or word. And if you lead, you only lead from the back, you never lead from the front. So people learn to walk, and they know that somebody is, like the story of the person who held the child in the hands and the footprints disappear on the beach. It's like that. I mean, there's no permanent footprints for us. There's always this shadow, I feel, that can guide the movement. When it's guided by the right reason and the right cause and the right purpose, and the right goals and vision, and there's no other ism, there's no either ego in this. There should not be either ego. And if it ever comes up, I'm happy when the brickbat hits, because it's there to make you a better person. That's what I believe this journey is all about. So that's what Padma Shri did. It surprised us, and when it surprised us, everybody celebrated their victory, not mine, theirs, people's victory.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, I've never heard,
Beyond that particular,
I have never heard this kind of reaction to Padma Shri. I mean, everybody's like, oh my God, the Padma Shri, Padma Shri, but you have been easy going with it. And of course, with no disrespect, but it is so beautiful that you're actually talking about Padma Shri belonging to the entire community that has worked with you rather than just you. It is such a humbling thought, and also the doership idea that you just brought in, because we spoke about the doership idea over the messages and you said more about this when we talk later. So I remember, and now I relate what you were trying to say. Wow.
yeah.
So,
It's really like no one hand can clap, right? So you always need two hands, and if 100 two hands clap, the sound is loud enough, and and that's what change happens. But in silence also is the same power. Let's not believe it's only the loud noise. It's not only the cacophony. There's a lot of silence that is very powerful. Allowing people to discover themselves in that moment of silence or noise, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, that's for an asthmatic. I've spoken quite a lot, I think. Okay. No, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying chatting with you. No problem.
thank you so much, ma'am. I'm enjoying learning so much from you today. Um, I want to the next two questions will in fact be the last two questions of the interview. When I was typing my messages to you, I saw your WhatsApp chat status, and it said that in giving is living. So I want to understand from your journey about the art of giving, because art of giving plays such an important role. It is the center of this entire Dwarka movement. Please tell me about the art of giving.
The art of giving has been, I think, carved elsewhere else. The creator of such ideas or thoughts, it's somewhere else. Because who are you to be feeling very pompous about using words like, who am I to be feeling pompous about using words like, in giving is living or whatever. I just feel that when we are here and when we are doing something that's related to anything at all, it's first to believe that giving is not about you. Giving is about believing that the person who you're working with, who you think is actually the receiver, is the one who is giving you much, much more. One, they're letting you be with them, to look at the opportunity of being able to, what we think we are serving them, actually it's because somebody has accepted you as who you are. Somebody has accepted to trust you and have faith in you and believe that perhaps in this partnership, relationship, or friendship, or whatever, some change is going to happen for the better. So the real you that is giving is not the ego you, and it's the one receiving is not the ego I either. The I that's doing it is going way beyond yourself, and therefore who or what is that I? I'm not somebody who's going to talk deeply about any form of self-realization, etc. But I am one who firmly believes in what Rumi may say, or Khalil Gibran may say, or words that you hear which make you believe that you have to go beyond yourself and you're nobody, because there's a vast expanse. Or even the Little Prince in the book, The Little Prince, I mean, it's one of my most fascinating books, and I just love The Little Prince. So we shared that together. So I just feel there's a world of discovery of the greater joy of just being. So that just being is not about the ego I. It's the much more holistic, complete beingness. And that being is what the giving is all about. So there's nothing that you're giving, certainly not in materialistic form, certainly not thinking that, you are giving your time or energy. You by choice have decided this is making you happier, and therefore you want to go out there and be able to think you are giving, actually when the giver is someone else and you're receiving. And when you look at it in that format, if people were to really ask me beyond questions about just who is receiving it or not, I would go deeper into saying that I feel that is the real idea of what people say God. What is God if people were to say or ask? I would think that in the small words like giving and so on, it's really still within a framework. It's still closed in. The greater bigness of it is that it's an expanse. There's an expanse of completeness in this whole conversation that is going beyond you and me right now. So neither one of us is giving or anything. We are living, but we are living through somebody else that's giving us this energy to live. And what is that somebody else, something else, whatever it is? Opportunity and choice brought us together. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here together. And we are here together for a long time to come. It's not one interview. And therefore, I believe that all these things that we may call chance, choice, not yours, someone else's, all of this is part of the holistic thought of in giving is living. Just keep giving of yourself, whatever you can, whatever you can. If you are filled with joy, just empty out the joy to someone else. So don't be filled with sorrow. There's no need to be filled with sorrow or fear or disdain or anger. Or I'm not saying I don't feel all of this, I do, but I'm telling myself that you should not, you don't, because then you don't want to go around giving all those vibes or those kind of emotions out. You're not going to give that. So you've got to be strong, you've got to be courageous, you've got to have joy within you to be able to give some joy, because you will definitely receive joy. So the giver is there. That's what I'm constantly saying, that the giving and living and all of this is a whole. And one day I just put it there because we talk about art of so many things. So I thought, just the art of giving is living. And we are living right now. We are not yet, we're supposed to die within. I hear this pretty often. I have a family that gets into these discussions, and often we hear that before we really die, we should die, which means the ego should die way before we physically die. And that's the full world. So that's the drive one is hoping to work towards. It's a beautiful world, Himika.
Ma'am, my last question is going to be, so when we started this interview, I asked you a question that I ask everybody. But my last question is the one that I've not asked anybody, because this kind of conversation has never happened. Your relationship with God, how do you summarize it? After this entire journey, which is still very much on, but you've had a closer relationship with God than a lot of us, is what I feel from your journey. Tell me about it.
I can only say it in very simplistic terms, because I don't believe it's happened like many others who are really in that journey searching for it happens. But what I do believe happens to me is I come in touch with people, and mostly I'm in the villages. So people who we talk about are people who have not had enough, of anything that we have had, let's say. They're not, I won't call them any more deprived as such, but they have been oppressed or exploited or whatever else we say. But two things happen when you come in touch with these people. One, they're complete, holistic joy of meeting you. They have no boundaries, no barriers, no nothing. They just look at you, greet you. Of course, on the flip side are others who distrust them, but leave that out. I'm talking about actually a relationship where you go and you meet this girl walking down the road, and she's she's just, I see especially children. And when I see this happening, I don't know what happens in me, but the tears are streaming down my eyes very often, very often. And they're not tears for somebody who is suffering, or it's not tears for somebody who looks deprived. To me, this person looks so complete, so whole. I know I have to fight poverty for them. I know I have to be with them and fight other challenges of hunger, but I don't see them starving like we starve sometimes within the soul. The soul is complete over there. And this is what I strongly believe. So, why am I moved to tears so often? That must be what people call God, because it comes from within. It's the heart that chokes first. It's not, some mind telling you cry now. It's not. The heart really holds you together there and it chokes. So what makes you feel that way? I call that God. Beyond that, there's a long way to go. Maybe there were days where I went to a temple. Temple bells are beautiful. I went to a fabulous school called Rishi Valley School, and Rishi Valley, just lets you live with nature. That's God, completely all around you. Nobody says God or no God. It's right there all around you. From the age of 5, I was in a boarding hostel there, and I lived it through. I went into Women's Christian College, which showed me the beauty and joy of listening to the Psalms and understanding the whole philosophy of love and forgiveness by just seeing what was around me. The college I too had people from all classes, all castes, all mixes, religions. It was just so beautiful. I mean, I saw Ben-Hur when I was a small child, and if I could feel very moved by watching Jesus wipe the feet of the leprosy afflicted there, or if you listen to the Gautama Buddha's story and then start questioning, when you ask deeper questions, then you go into another realm. But when you really ask questions about how you could not see the suffering and you went out to ask questions about it, then that takes you into a different uh, realm of asking questions. And so there was the whole experiences of going through various kinds of schools. And I think there was a deep influence in my life, in my own growing up years, when what I saw my father live with the people in the factory, the labor, the human element, the humanity and the humaneness and the kindness, all of these wrapped, these are just words. But beyond all this, within you there is that feeling, a very deep feeling. And it goes beyond all otherism. So where does that come from? To me, right now, that's God, and that's enough. If there's a flash somewhere else, well and good. If there's no flash, no regrets, because I feel I've had thousands of these gods around me all the time. That energy that I feel. So, not taking the God idea lightly, but God to me is love. In simple words, pure love. If you can really feel it, then I believe you have touched some fringe of at least God's finger or whatever you want to touch over there. Yeah, just pure love. That's God.
In fact, the way you described it, I still remember when I was in the 10th standard, there was this, in my English books, there was this story of Ruskin Bond. It was called The Cherry Tree. And the cherry tree had this little boy who got a seed, and he plants the seed. The seed it grows from a small seed to a tree, and that entire journey. And at the end of it, he just touches the bark of the tree, and he says, "Is this what it feels to be God?" And for somebody who was reading it,
Exactly.
it touches you so innocently, the innocence
Uh-huh.
of that child and how he relates to God. So I was taken back to that exact moment, you know. So, ma'am, thank you so much. This has been one of the best interviews I have taken because it's
You.
just the way I look at things in a very big way. Thank you so much. It's so good to have you at the Daydreamers. I don't even need to tell you to give a line to inspire people, etc. Because this entire interview is an inspiration of sorts for everybody. Thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Himika. Lovely meeting you.